and then I'm gonna let you take it away.
Okay. I thought when Mary Jane and I had spoken, that the people weren't necessarily interested in getting too far into the weeds on the affordable housing TIFs, but so I thought I would just do a brief kind of quick run through of kind of what they are, how they get created, and leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So I'll just share my screen here. Everybody seeing that all right? So there have been TIF districts authorized under the Maine statutes for many years that are economic development districts done through DECD. The Affordable Housing District Act was adopted in 2003. It allows municipalities to create separate districts to be used to create affordable housing. And that definition is any serving households up to 120% of the area median income. So it can encompass both single-family home ownership as well as rental. We've approved 81 TIF districts in 31 different municipalities since the program started. I've only been involved in the last 2 years. The person that had been handling it from inception retired. So to adopt a TIF, the municipality has to put together a series of documents. One is just the simple district map. You have to draw the boundaries around the area of the town. You have to create a development program that's a separate step that defines and describes what you're going to do with the captured revenue and how it's going to create the development and maintenance of affordable housing. There's a series of statutory criteria, which I'll just quickly run through in a minute, that you have to address. And then you have to attach financial projections as to the amount of TIF revenue you anticipate collecting and what you're doing with it. After that's done, you have to hold a public hearing to solicit public comments on the district and the program. The legislative body then has to adopt both the district and the development program. Once that's done, that gets submitted to Maine Housing for review. And if it's all found to be acceptable, the director signs and issues a certificate of approval. The basic criteria is that at least 25% of the area in the district has to be suitable for residential use, and the district has to be primarily residential. And that's why often the districts get fairly narrowly drawn around the proposed housing project. At least 32% of any units in the district have to meet that definition of affordable housing. So it doesn't require 100%. There has to be a mechanism in place to maintain that affordability. If it's a rental project, it has to be maintained for 30 years. And if it's home ownership, it has to be for 10 years. And the length of the program can't be more than 30 years after the year that it's approved by Maine Housing. So there is a cap on how long it can be in place. The statutory criteria, the district has to satisfy certain statutory caps or maximums. Any single district can't exceed 2% of the municipal acreage. The aggregate area of all districts, and that's both housing and economic development districts, can't be more than 5% of a municipality's acreage. The original assessed value of the property inside the district can't be more than 5% of the total taxable property in the municipality. That's usually not a problem. And then the captured revenue, basically you start with that baseline of whatever the assessed value is in the district at the time it's approved. and then the increase taxable income based on the increase in the development within the district, that captured revenue has to be used in compliance with the statute, and that varies depending on what you're doing inside the district and what might be going on outside the district. Within the district, it's all sort of the basic things that you would anticipate: the cost of acquiring the land, demolishing or renovating existing buildings or creating new buildings, paying for fees for engineering, architectural, legal, accounting, paying financing costs, debt service, relocation costs if there's temporary relocation during any rehab, ongoing operating costs, which is the primary use on a multifamily project, because the TIF revenues come in annually. It's just paying their ongoing operating costs. You can also pay for any recreational childcare facilities that are, as long as it's available to the district residents and it's created inside the district. The bigger problem that we sometimes run into with proposals is funding that the municipality wants to use to pay for things outside the district. The statute requires that those costs be directly related or made necessary by the creation of the district. The first example is the sort of most common, where maybe you have a site that somebody wants to build a housing project and it's not currently served by public sewer and water, and the municipality is willing to pay to run the sewer and water lines out to that property. Those costs can be used, the municipality's portion of the TIF revenues can be used for that. It can also pay for, and these are just examples, the statute doesn't attempt to list everything, but certain public safety improvements, road improvements, things that are because of increased traffic caused by the development, for family projects, and this is a very common one. You can pay for the costs of increased public education because of the influx of new students into the district. The town can also choose to take its municipal revenue and create a revolving loan fund or an investment fund. And we've seen an increase in towns choosing to do that, where they start seed money to create an affordable housing fund. There are certain limitations on what they can do with it, but they can then take those funds and create housing outside the district, elsewhere in the community. The municipality and usually an affordable housing developer will then kind of negotiate the terms of the program and district. They can capture anywhere up to 100% of the increased revenue, again, over that baseline. They can then choose to direct all of that captured revenue for the full term to the housing developer to pay for the actual housing development, or they can split the revenue and retain some for the municipality. And that it's all over the place in terms of how that gets negotiated. The most common vehicle for then paying the TIF revenues to the housing developers is a document called the Credit Enhancement Agreement. And that's that the developer or the project owner has to still pay their full annual taxes every year to the town. And then the agreement is the town paying the share, that the agreed upon share, back to the developer to pay their ongoing costs, debt service, whatever. Any TIF revenues that are retained by the municipality can only be used as they originally set forth in the development program. So they have to have an idea of what they're going to do with their share of the revenues. And again, it could be a revolving loan fund, or it could be an actual project for, as I said, road improvements, municipal improvements, or so on. If they ever decide that they want to change what they want to do with that, they do have to go back through the process and do an amendment to the TIF program. They also have to file an annual report certifying that the original purpose is still being met and that units are remaining affordable. So that's a quick, very quick, kind of nuts and bolts overview. I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
So Don, I have one question. You mentioned that outside of the boundary that the TIF is drawn in, you can use that to expand sewer. So can you go into a little more detail on that? Like it could be used to expand sewer outside of that boundary.
Correct. Again, the most common situation we see on something like this is they'll establish how much of the TIF revenue is going to be captured. It's typically the full 100%. Mm-hmm. And then they'll negotiate a split. And so maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 75-25. And there'll be the portion that's going to be paid over to the housing developer. And again, this model is most typically with a rental housing project. The home ownership we can talk about, but it's proved a little more difficult to work with the TIF statute. But so those revenues would be paid over to the developer each year. The municipality then can use those funds that they're retaining for projects. Anything outside the district has to meet that statutory criteria where it has to be directly related or something that's caused by the creation of this district. It can't just be a municipal wish list of things that they want to do. So for example, if you've got a piece of raw land, developer wants to build a housing project on there, but the nearest sewer and water line's a mile away, and they're going to have to extend the sewer and water out to that project. The municipality can negotiate to use their share of the revenues to pay that. They can either sell bonds to pay for it all up front and then use the TIF revenues to pay the debt service on the bonds, or they can just, pay it out of ongoing TIF revenues.
Sure. Okay, thank you for that. That's good.
Don, this is Eloise Vitale. I'm wondering, I apologize if I missed it, but can you say more about the revolving loan fund and what that can be used for?
It has to be used for the creation of affordable housing, which is, again, as defined in the statute, it's households up to 120% of the area median income. And so, yeah, what some of the towns have been doing lately is, they'll, again, negotiate a 25 or 50% share of the revenue, TIF revenue, and then over time, they're using that revenue to seed money, a revolving loan fund that they're then using. Well, it can be a revolving loan fund or it can be a direct investment. It doesn't have to be loaned. And they use it to help facilitate affordable housing projects elsewhere in the town. So that's kind of a little bit of an exception to the general rule that if you're using the revenues outside the district, it has to be tied to that original district. That would be an exception, obviously, where and there's certain restrictions. You can't use it for like nursing homes or dormitories. I mean, there's the whole sort of standard list of things that you can't use it for. But as long as it's again, the affordable housing is defined in the TIF statute. It takes a little while to build up a meaningful amount of money, obviously, on any one TIF district, but.
I got a question, Orion, for Don. This is Brian Dancause with MCOG. Is there, I know like with the downtown TIFs, well, I guess my question is it possible for like TIF proceeds from other districts, existing districts to be, is that available to the development program for the affordable housing?
The rules on the DECD, downtown and economic development TIFs are a little bit different, and I'm obviously not as familiar with that. I know the legislature this past year just amended that language to specifically authorize the use of the municipal share of revenue in those districts to be used for housing, affordable housing, as they tied the definition back to the affordable housing TIF statute. Outside of the DCD districts to sort of allow the municipalities to use those funds for housing as well, homeless programs, housing. So again, that just passed. So I'm sure nobody's really jumped on it yet, but
yeah, because the reason I ask is that it's been a while since I looked, into the details, but it used to be that as long as there was a nexus or connection between districts, that you could use proceeds from one and another. And I'm pretty sure the downtown TIFs, they were the ones where it was the clearest or the cleanest, where you could use. There was almost like an implied nexus between a downtown district and other districts. So, because residents use the downtown, regardless of where they live, and businesses too. So I was just curious. So thanks.
Yeah, I think the economic development TIF statute is, I think, more broadly, a little more broadly worded in terms of its uses, and the districts tend to be more a larger district with a lot of different activity going on within it, whereas a housing TIF district has to be more directly, it's usually more narrowly focused. Most of them are specifically drawn just right around the boundaries of a particular housing project because of the restrictions on it. And so, but yeah, there are situations where you can, for example, we've had elderly housing projects being proposed where they're using the municipal revenue to enhance their transportation services to allow the elderly tenants to be able to get back and forth between, appointments and things, and maybe facilitating the creation of a senior center, or other things that are in the area but not inside the district.
So real quick, Jeremy, you had your hand up before Brian, and then Deborah made a comment, and then Marcy, you had your hand up. So we'll go in that order real quick. Jeremy?
Sure. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks. Thank you for this, Don. I just had a question. I came from a larger municipality, which was a city here in Maine, and city government and the functions of city councils tend to facilitate these kinds of programs a lot easier than through town government or in town government. So I'm just curious. I mean, you're talking a lot of this, and I see it working very well in those larger communities that are city council form of government, where city councils can make these decisions as opposed to the voters. Do you have any good examples or of town meeting form of governments, towns that have that form of government that actually have gone through this process and done affordable housing TIFs for the town? It's just really hard sometimes to educate the public, the voter, when all of these things have to be approved at town meeting. So I'm just curious, and any thoughts or comments on that, Don?
I would agree that again, I've only been involved directly here at Maine Housing the last 2 years on this. Just scanning through the list of current, and of course I'm not totally familiar with every town in terms of what form of government they have, but just we have one in Fort Fairfield, we have one in Bridgeton, we have one in Heartland, we have one in Machias, Orono. Most of them are, yes, in the larger communities, because that tends to be where the housing is getting created, unfortunately. But
all right, no, that's helpful. I think Bridgeton and yeah, I think we can just look to some of those other. I think it would just be helpful for folks like myself to have at least just to be able to reach out to some of those other communities to see how they got some of this stuff through their process. Town meeting form of government can be challenging sometimes. So
That's true.
Just maybe if we can somehow get a list or something of municipalities that do this would be very helpful. That way, I don't like recreating the wheel. So if other communities have done it successfully, I'd rather piggyback on what they've done and see if we can bring that over to like the town of Camden, for instance. So thank you. I appreciate it.
yeah, I think regardless of whether it's being voted on by, selectmen, council, or the town, you always run into that issue where you get a few people that don't fully understand how this is working, and they just look at it as a big giveaway to a rich developer, and they come and attack the process. And I think
it's easy to talk to 7 or 5 city councilors about the issue and convince them that what they should do. It's much harder to convince a populace, that of 5,000 that need to vote on it.
Correct.
That's where you run into challenges. So,
I mean, this has become, and obviously the higher the tax burden, the bigger the benefit this is to a project. But I mean, when you run some of the numbers, and of course the TIF projections are soft numbers because you can't predict mill rates and assessed values out for 30 years, even though they're forced to do that as part of this process. But when you look at the estimated TIF revenue that's coming back to a project, and you look at the projected annual operating budget, the TIF revenues can be anywhere from 10 to 20% of that operating budget projected for the first year. So it can make or break the underwriting of these projects. It's critically important. It gets pledged to the mortgage holders. I rarely close a multifamily project here these days that doesn't have a TIF. It's that important. And so I think the response to the people who don't understand is you can continue to collect 100% of tax revenues on zero, or you can collect, a portion of it on, a drastically increased assessed value. And yeah, that isn't going to convince everybody, but yeah, there is often a educational hurdle as to how this works. And obviously, yes, if the community leaders are on board and see this as a valuable tool, then it's increasing. As I said, we've created 81 of them since 2003, but in the 2 years I've been doing this, I think I've approved 28 of them. So it's definitely increasing in importance.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I had a question from Deborah in the chat. She chatted me directly. So Deborah, do you want me to read that, or do you want to speak on it? Deborah Keller. Okay, she told me to please read. Will someone be talking about the possible financial benefits to the municipalities related to school funding, for example? So Don, do you have anything that you could?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I kind of skipped over that part. Yeah, the reason the town benefits from this is actually three parts. The total assessed value of a town factors in, obviously, in the amount of revenue sharing the town gets, the amount of educational funding it gets, and also factors into the percentage of county taxes that they have to pay. Any sheltered TIF district, the increased assessed value in that TIF does not count for any of those three factors. So for the whole potentially 30 years of a TIF, that assessed value, increased assessed value caused by that affordable housing development does not count against you for revenue sharing or education, and does not count against you for calculating the county tax percentage. And that's really the selling point for a municipality being willing to do this.
Thank you for that. Deborah, hopefully that answers a little bit to you, and if anybody else was on the same concern of that, hopefully that addressed it a little bit.
I'd just like to add something to that, Orion, is that, and for Don, is that, so it's fair to say that if a community, wants to develop a affordable housing project, it's kind of silly not to use a TIF to do it because of the tax shelter benefit. Isn't that fair to say?
Yeah, it depends on, we've actually had several TIFs recently where the town didn't really have any particular use for any share of the revenue, but they weren't doing 100% for the project either. So they just allowed their 25 or 50% to come in as general fund revenue, and obviously that doesn't get sheltered, but they also are free to do whatever they want with that general fund revenue. So it becomes kind of a negotiation with the town as to how much they feel the project needs in order to go forward, and then what, if anything, they want to do with their share, if they want to actually capture it as TIF revenue and use it for the slightly more restricted uses that or whether they want to just get the increase in general fund revenue.
And then here real quick, we'll go, if Brian, if that's good for you, Marcy, we'll go to you.
Hi. During our affordable housing comp plan meetings with stakeholders, we found out that one of the reasons they're not using the TIF is because our zoning doesn't allow for enough units on the site to make it affordable. And the other concern was that land was so expensive that using the TIF was not going to be doable. So could you address those two concerns? And if we changed our zoning, would we have to amend current existing TIF?
I mean, they're completely unrelated. I mean, obviously, any municipality needs to look at its codes and zoning to the extent it's being an obstacle rather than facilitating the creation of housing. But, you know, they do have to, in the application, they do have to indicate, you know, what zone the district is in and whether or not the affordable housing is allowed in that district. But it's just sort of a checklist item. It's not anything that would be required to be amended later if the project, if you've got a TIF that's already in existence and the project was already, you know, facilitated in that district, presumably it complied with the zoning at the time. And if you change your zoning, that wouldn't necessitate, in and of itself, would not necessitate amending the TIF.
Okay. And what about the cost of land being prohibitive to using TIFs?
I don't know why that, to me, that would advocate for using a TIF to help return some of those costs. I mean, costs for everything is going up. I mean, housing development costs are skyrocketing with materials and, you know, cost of land and whatever. And so it makes the development process very difficult to pull together enough equity and enough debt to create the project. And the TIF revenue, obviously, you know, can help offset some of that increase. And the higher, you know, the higher the assessed value upon completion of the project, the more TIF revenue you're going to get. Obviously, if you've got land that's already in existence, and so the original assessed value of that land, you know, that sets that floor, yes, it's going to set it a little higher, and therefore the captured revenue won't be as great. But I'm not sure that it would, that in and of itself would prohibit or make a TIF not still a viable option.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm seeing John. You had your hand up?
Yes, Susan Silverio here. I have a question. It seems like you're talking about housing projects. We're a smaller town. Could this ever be used for various sites, such as properties that have come to the town's ownership for tax liens that are more distributed into a wider economic area?
As long as, again, those statutory criteria are met. I mean, I don't know if you're talking about single family. That the single family aspect has been a little difficult because, again, the way the mechanism works is the property within the district has to obviously pay their taxes. And then the TIF revenue and whatever portion of the TIF revenue that's being allocated to the project gets paid back once the taxes are paid. When you have a rental housing project, you have an ongoing owner of that project that's got ongoing operating expenses and debt service and whatever. And so you're returning the portion of the taxes to them to help facilitate the ongoing operation of the project. If you have a developer going in and creating single family homes, a subdivision or a condominium development, they sell those units off and leave. And so it's a harder model to make work with the TIF revenue because you have obviously a whole series of scattered taxpayers that all have to pay their taxes on time in order to create the TIF revenue. And then there isn't the obvious person there to return the TIF revenue to. We did have one recently in Portland. It was a creative way to do it. It took a willing lender to do it, but they had a project, it was a condo project that had, a total development cost to build. Obviously, the developer has to retire any debt they have on the project in order to sell the units, because the individual unit buyer has to get their own mortgage to facilitate the acquisition. And in order to sell those condominium units at a price affordable to the targeted, affordable housing that they wanted, they had a gap. It was about $1.5 million gap in what they could sell the units for versus what the development cost was. And so they got a lender who was willing to loan solely on the TIF revenue. So they didn't encumber the real estate. And so the TIF revenue over the 30 years is going to retire that extra $1.5 million in debt and allow them to build the project and sell the units to the 120% affordable. That model, I think, is probably the only way it would work, because then you still have somebody, a single party that you're sending that TIF revenue to every year, and they're just using it to, pay off that additional debt that was needed in order to create the project in the first place.
It could be a larger place that could be converted into apartments, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We've had, mill buildings that they're converting into housing. And, obviously the more traditional is just a piece of raw land that somebody's building a new housing project on. But yeah, anything that meets that definition of affordable housing is
Okay, thank you.
is eligible.
Thank you.
So let's see. Does anybody else have a question I can think of?
I have a question for Dawn. I'm assuming that the list of approved affordable housing TIF districts is public information, correct?
Yes.
So is that available on the main housing website, or can you provide that?
I can. I don't think it's on the website, but and because it changes all the time. But
Right.
But I can certainly email Mary Jane
Okay.
the current list.
Great, thank you.
Be appreciative. Yeah. Mary Jane.
I'm wondering, do you have quite a few projects that are market rate and affordable housing, or?
I can't speak to the ones before I took over. Everything that I want to make sure that's accurate. I'm pretty sure everything that I've worked on since I took over has been either a low-income housing tax credit project, which is typically, well, I won't say that. There's some that do a mix with some of, you might have 60 units and do, 12 of them is market rate and 48 is target. The way the tax credit program works, you only get to claim the tax credit on the basis of the affordable units. So the more market rate units you do, the less tax credits you're going to get. And so, but oftentimes they do want to have some mixed income in there, and so they will do some portion of it. But a lot of them will do 100% affordable, just so that, because again, it maximizes the tax credit.
And how competitive is the process? What percentage of people aren't able to get funding? Which municipalities?
Competitive for what?
For allowing this whole process, or it's not about that, it's just about meeting the requirements? And I suppose the limiting factor these days is a developer willing to do it. Is that the hardest part?
Well, it can be, and it's the more, when you get out of the higher area median income areas, it's hard because development costs are pretty much the same everywhere, except maybe for land. And if the incomes aren't there to support the rents, then the rents can't be high enough to support the development of the project. It becomes difficult. But there's no competitive selection for the TIF. Obviously, some of the programs here that we have for our our funding. Some of those are competitive. We do also do walk-in. And again, the most common area that we're seeing now with these TIFs is that they're partnered up with the low-income housing tax credit, which is the largest subsidy source available for the creation of rental projects anyway. And there are two, without sort of getting too far into the weeds on it, there are two forms that tax credit takes. There's a higher percentage tax credit that's a competitive, there's a ceiling amount that we have available every year, and that is a competitive process that we allocate. And then there's a lower tier credit that comes with our tax exempt bond financing. And we typically do that as just a walk-in that anybody can do. And very often they'll always, they'll also process a TIF through their municipality to help supplement the operating budget.
Can I, this is Deb, can I just make a comment on this?
Sure.
The 9% low-income housing tax credit is competitive, that was just explained. One of the point mechanisms for that competition is having a TIF that meets certain criteria. So in order to compete and be a viable project to score enough points, you almost always see a 9% tax credit project with a TIF. So it's, that's where the competition comes in. That's where the value of the TIF comes in for a developer.
Yeah, that can be actually any tax reduction mechanism. It doesn't necessarily have to be a TIF. We have one municipality that I'm not quite sure why, but they offer the same basic formula for sharing of tax revenues, but they don't go through the affordable housing TIF process. So they don't get the municipal benefit, but they're still giving the benefit to the project. And as long as they've committed to do that, they still get the points on the QAP round. But and yes, the scoring matrix is the deeper and longer the TIF or mechanism, the more points they score.
Has the area median income in our area been updated at all lately? Because it's been pretty low after all this, the rising prices. Is that going to be updated soon?
I believe HUD updates those annually.
Yeah, I know. Last time I checked, it didn't seem it, in reality. But so hopefully they're updating it soon.
Yeah, I'm not sure what their timeline is on that.
Does anybody else have any questions for Don? Not hearing any. Well, Don, do you have anything else you'd like to add on to this?
No, if there are no further questions, I've included my contact information. So if anybody has any questions afterwards, they can shoot me an email or give me a call.
I guess Mary Jane has a question.
Yeah, when you were talking about extending a sewer line for a mile, I guess that's one of the limiting factors in our areas is a lot of towns have no sewer, so that probably wouldn't work, but just extending it is quite an expense. How does that factor in, money wise? Well,
that was just an example again of the type of expense that's eligible for expenditure outside of the, and that also can be upgrades to the treatment, sewer treatment or water treatment plants. So again, if you can, as long as the municipality can tie what they're proposing to do with it directly back to that project or that district, it's potentially eligible. So those are just the types of things. What I just use that as an example because we had somebody once a municipality that came in and wanted to use their share for something that was just a municipal thing that they wanted to do that had no tie and nothing at all to do with the proposed project. And, we were not able to approve that. So as long as, like, for example, you couldn't go off and just create a sewer line somewhere else in the town because they wanted to do that. It had nothing to do with the actual district or project that was being, it's just that nexus that they have to show that that what they're proposing to do with the money is related to that district. And that's just an example of that we've seen in the past where and sometimes it's just, they're going to create some additional traffic flow. So they need to do some improvements in the street network and sidewalks and create some accessible sidewalks. And but that's taking those improvements outside the district itself. And again, as long as they can show that that's designed to facilitate the development of the project, and it's eligible.
Thank you.
Well, I think if nobody else has any questions.
I got one more, and this was kind of a wild one, but for Don, is there any mechanism for like a project, because housing needs, it's a regional need, and I'm just wondering, is there any mechanism for multiple a regional project, because of course it's going to happen within the boundaries of a municipality, but whether it be the sharing of the additional tax base or whatever. I assume the answer is probably no, right?
It certainly isn't envisioned under the TIF statute, because obviously that's approved by a particular municipality for something in their town. In terms of, a lot of the regional things I think come into with like transportation and other things that go towards assisting with the development of the project. But yeah, I don't think the TIF revenue would ever be, I suppose you could get a parcel of land that straddles two municipalities and they want to have them each do the TIF on their portion of the project site, but I think it would still have to be done individually by those municipalities.
Okay. So I think I don't want it to end. We got 15 minutes left, but I'm not hearing any other questions yet. So we'll give it maybe a minute and see if anybody else has anything to add or a question for you, Don, I guess.
I think I successfully put them all to sleep.
So Don, I assume I looked at Belfast, and they have they started out with a project on White Street that was 47 acres, and then it shifted to, I think, 4.5 or something. And I wasn't sure if that was because neighbors were kind of concerned about the change in the district, or it's just easier to do it with the developers.
That was actually our concern. They proposed a TIF district that we didn't think would fly under the statute, because they were incorporating a bunch of land that part of which was an existing housing project that had already been there for 10 years, and the rest of it was a bunch of single family homes that they weren't envisioning actually doing any affordable housing in there. It was just an attempt to sweep in additional acreage that it didn't seem to. So they had the two actual projects that were being proposed on opposite sides of the street by two different developers, and so they eventually, and that was really the factor that was leading them to create the TIF. They were asked by the two developers, and so they eventually agreed they should simply shrink the boundary down to encompass those two projects and left the rest of it out. So that was proposed, but it was never actually approved or final voted on in the larger district.
It looked like it had upset some of the neighbors too, who
I'm sure they would have been confused. Yeah. Why was their property being included when there was no designed project going in there? But
I'm seeing that now they're proposing an old public works site for, I think, 48 units of, that's 1 and 2 bedrooms or something, some market and some not. And I guess they're for any age that needs 1 or 2 bedroom units. So I think
that
that was in the
that the
pipeline or
con-
something.
Is that the Congress Street one?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I don't know
Yeah,
enough
the
about it.
old Public Works site. Yeah, that TIF's been approved. Yeah.
Oh, great.
I don't know where
s-
the project stands in the process, but I know the TIF is approved.
Sarah has her hand up.
Hi, thanks. That led me to think about land availability here in Rockland. That's a little bit of a challenge. We actually don't have as much available land as some of the surrounding communities might. And so that's one of the locational challenges for us looking at projects like this. And I was curious if you could speak to the typical size of, or the minimum average size maybe of some of the projects that get approved. Like how small can you go and still have this work?
I
And
mean,
I'm sure some of
yeah.
that depends on the developer and what they're willing to throw in for, but just if you, what you're seeing in terms of trends as people are trying to think more outside the box, maybe. Thank you.
Oh, I mean, it's all over the place. I mean, it can be a 5-acre parcel because of the size of the project, if it's multiple buildings and parking and everything else, but I've seen them be, a fraction of an acre. We've even had one recently where they're doing a portion of a old mill building because they're going to condo it, and the housing is only going to be on a portion of the building. So it isn't even, it's just the footprint of the, so it's whoever the project's designed. I mean, obviously, yeah, if you get too small a site, it's hard. And I think somebody raised earlier the zoning issues. If you have off-street parking requirements, because that expands what the size of what you need to do, and it goes depending on, DEP, if there's, wetlands or, things that you're disturbing. So, I mean, the project sites are just, whatever a developer can scope out and make it work financially feasible, but also, just physically fit it within the property. But yeah, we've had, some of the in-town Portland ones have been, a third of an acre or less. It's basically just drawing it around the site of where they're going to plunk the building down.
Interesting.
Have you had let's see.
So Deborah, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say to Mary Jane's comment about the neighbors getting upset about a project is that one of the challenges of the TIF is because it needs city council approval, it becomes an opportunity for NIMBYs to oppose affordable housing when the opposition really may or may not have anything to do with the TIF. The opposition becomes about the TIF because that's a chance to, get an ear of the city council. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for these, and is to educate municipalities and councils and town governments to understand the value of the TIF and to be able to kind of set aside the NIMBY opposition about the affordable housing. So I'm just pointing that out as one of the challenges. And I think sometimes the use of the term TIF kind of ramps up that opposition in some ways. But that's just my opinion. It's such a valuable tool. But again, it's often because it has city council approval attached to it, it becomes, yet another hurdle for those of us trying to get projects through.
So Deborah, if you don't mind, I have a follow-up question for you. Do you have any examples or experience of having to go through that and then get, I guess, the approval thereafter, so people approve it and they move forward with the project?
I mean, I'm not sure I follow your question, but
Okay.
Certainly I can just say in Bath, and I think Ben is on the call, there's 2 projects in Bath. I'm not part of Bath Housing, isn't related to the 2 projects, but the Uptown and the Hughes School project, I believe both had TIFs that the city council voted on. But that, again, that process brings out a group of people that is going to oppose the TIF. Are they really opposing the TIF? Are they really just, that's their opportunity to oppose the project? And again, because it goes to council, it ramps it up. In the end, Bath City Council's very, a great council. They take the opportunity to really understand the TIF process, understand the value of it, and they've approved both of them. But in some communities, that's the hurdle. And
I guess
you
my
can't
question
get
was
through
more
that
on
hurdle.
the NIMBYism, how to overcome that, because in the smaller towns, we're gonna have a lot. I mean, we're gonna have to deal with the whole town. So just taking that example, maybe some example that you have with that from a city council perspective, maybe we can understand a little better, so we can address the people who will bring the crowd to vote it down.
I've been doing affordable housing for 25 years. I developed for 10. I've been sued. I've been, had projects, people feel very strongly about this, and I'm not sure there's anything we can say to change their mind. I think the key is to have reasonable people in your municipalities, and really as a developer, your obligation is to very clearly, without lingo, be able to explain what the TIF tool is, explain the projects, explain the value, tie it back to the comprehensive plan, tie it back to community needs, and hope that you have reasonable people responding, and also be able to filter out, the NIMBY people. And, the way I describe it here in Bath is that certain people just have a different vision for what they want Bath to be. And some people want it to be a wealthy, homogenous, all-white community, and many people don't. And so I'm trying to explain how housing plays a role in what we want our communities to be is really, I think, a key part of the process. And, in a very nice way, just slowly educating the community on how housing policy affects the makeup of our community.
Okay. Thank you for that. Ben, your hand is up after that.
Yeah, I was just going to jump on with kind of saying thank you to Deb for saying that so eloquently. I think I know most of you on here, but if you don't, I'm Ben Averell. I'm the planning director for the city of Bath. We have had 2 successful housing TIFs go through the city, both that have had a couple of folks who have spoken to city council in opposition. More often, it seems like the opposition is more about opposition against a TIF or what they're assuming is a tax break to a developer, and less about the project itself. And so as staff, we've encouraged the developers that have come forward to really share benefits to the city, and as staff that we try to work on sharing with our council and with the community how the TIF process works and how the mechanisms work, so that hopefully folks have a better understanding of that it is a good benefit to the community. But it's tough. I mean, we've seen, I'm sure all of us have seen the news about what just happened recently in Cape Elizabeth. And we certainly have had similar conversations more recently here in Bath as well. So it's hard to try to get over some of those hurdles of either NIMBYism or feeling like folks don't want to be giving things away to developers or other folks. So, yeah.
So I have a question from a regional perspective and where we're at. Oh, sorry, Jeremy, did you have a hand up or was that a hand clap?
I did, and I just wanted to comment really quick on the NIMBYism piece. I think it's, I think it's important to recognize what our communities are and what made them what they are and why we value them so much. And I think in working on your comp plan to address the affordable housing issues, to address where it's appropriate for single family housing. I mean, it is appropriate from my perspective in planning to have appropriate zoning laid out in your community to protect what you have. And I sometimes I think, and I live in Belfast, I work for the town of Camden. I will say in Belfast, they have dropped these large housing projects for the most part into single family neighborhoods, which drastically changes the character. And I don't think it's really about NIMBYism. I think NIMBYism is just a good word to throw out. And I think it's really about what the community desires for what the community should be. And that's important, and that's laid out in your comp plan. So I think it's important for communities to address their comp plan and address these issues in their comp plan, because there's a place for all of this. You know, I can't imagine in Camden, we're going to put a affordable housing project on Bayview Street or Chestnut Street. I don't think anyone in their right mind would propose one or would like one in those locations. And there's locations and appropriately cited, again, properties for these things. So I think it's important to just use your comp plan appropriately to address these kinds of issues, because that's what your ordinances should be coming from and should be the basis for. And if you're going to end up in a lawsuit, your comp plan and your land use ordinance need to reflect these things. So I just think it's important to understand that. And I get a little frustrated, and maybe that's too harsh of a word. But when we talk about NIMBYisms and folks that live in single family homes don't want housing projects, it's not that people don't want housing developments in their community. They want them sited appropriately and in an appropriate location. I certainly don't want one next to my house in a single family neighborhood where they have 50 units. I don't think anyone would want that. So I think it's important to, and it's not that I'm a NIMBYist, it's just that things should be appropriately located in your community based on the values of your community. So I think it's just important to reflect on your comp plan and dig into that comp plan and amend it as needed, because that's the community document that guides all of this stuff. So those are my thoughts. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. So from MCED, our regional perspective here and what we do, would it be, I don't want to have like in detailed TIF workshops speaking specifically on TIFs, because I don't think the regional entity itself, we wouldn't have much of a role in getting that up and running, because it's, a local item. But it sounds like education is the key part on this, getting the understanding of it up and how it comes into play. So would it be in our interest from MCED's perspective to hold more of these style workshops as well throughout various communities? I don't know, throwing that out there.
I think this is Deb, anything you can do as a kind of a tutorial for municipal governments, fact sheets, examples of successful TIFs, a really clear document that explains the value of the municipal sharing. The TIF is not a dollar for dollar reduction, and people just don't get that. So, I think if municipalities could turn to you to do some of that work, to do a workshop for council, for example, if there's a TIF coming up. The other thing that we're looking at in Bath through our community development committee is a clear TIF application process. And so maybe if that's something that you all had and could share with municipalities, so it's just not willy-nilly. Somebody comes in and says, I want a TIF, and there's no process by which the municipal government vets it. That's kind of what we're talking about here.
Okay. I like that. John, you have your hand up.
Yes. I wonder, in addition to that, those kind of handouts, some examples, some stories, some narratives, just a few examples of the kind of things that have happened, a little brief word about the process. This could help the human interest aspect.
Sure. So John, so I know your name isn't John. You told me your name a minute ago. Can you remind me of your name?
Yes, Susan Silverio. I can't seem to change.
That's okay.
this.
That's okay.
Susan Silverio. I'm working with the comp plan review here in the town of Lincolnville.
Oh, okay. Cool. So were you making more of a just a general statement of like what you would like, or was there a question?
Yes, I think, yes,
Okay.
in terms of what, if I am going to be in a position of translating this to our townspeople, well, in addition to being a founder of a shelter for the homeless, I'm also been a kindergarten teacher. I think stories are very important for reaching people on the human level. And so the more you can tell a story about what the problem is, how people got together, how they were helped in this way through, and I really dislike acronyms, this tax incentive financing, how this could help our town in this way. Those kind of stories I find very helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. See what we can come up with. So Don, I know you might have to head out soon. There were a couple of comments that came in the chat. Those are statements. Jen from Bodenham, she asked if anyone had a good source of affordable housing case studies. They recommend, so Jen would like something similar to what Susan was mentioning. Is that what you would like to see?
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I like what Susan said. She has a good point about language use and using stories to reach people. I think also what I'd be interested is just kind of a, what has worked, like a whole system kind of what has worked from, very beginning to end for projects for, communities like Bodenham that really don't have a lot of history and resources with this, but still have the stated desire in our comp plan to work towards it. So, we need to look at what has worked elsewhere that could possibly work for us and how to get from A to Z.
Okay.
A question for Don. Have you ever had a project that was not on public sewer or public water in your 2 years you've been there?
I can't answer that because I wouldn't necessarily know on the TIF side. I'm not sure I ever closed one where we're financing it that wasn't on municipal services, but yeah, I can't speak to the TIF side. We wouldn't get into that level of the development in order to approve the TIF.
Very cool. Now, before Mary Jane asked her question, I think I saw another box light up. So before we ended, I wanted to see if anybody else had anything they needed to add or a question, maybe. Not hearing anything. Well, without further ado, Don, thank you very much for your time and your presentation. I do appreciate it. It's been very helpful. Now, I guess the last question I have for you, from everything we've kind of spitballed on getting more education out about TIFs, did you see anything in there that you'd say absolutely don't do? I guess I didn't hear you speak up. So do you think we're going in a good direction?
Yeah, I mean, as I think many of the people have mentioned, it is very much a local issue. And, I think the developers that have been successful have figured out ways when they're presenting at these public hearings to, figure out a way to kind of sell the benefits of the project. And usually they've got the municipal officials behind them already. So it's just a question of, being able to counteract any individual opposition. But most of the ones in the last year or so that I've seen, there've been very few people that have even showed up at the hearings. But yeah, it's an issue, obviously, and as somebody pointed out, the Cape Elizabeth example is a good example of that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mary Jane, for organizing this to get Don to us to give this presentation.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Don, and it's great to have everybody here. So thank you.
And,
welcome. And again, if anybody has any follow-up questions, just feel free to reach out.
Okay. And this is recorded, so it will be put up onto the MCED website probably hopefully end of the day, more than likely Monday. So if you want to go back to rewatch, take some notes, feel free. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks.